Oldschool Runescape is about to receive one of its biggest fundamental changes to date. In 2024, we're going to receive a big content rebalance that's going to be touching a wide swath of content, from endgame weapons to combat styles to agility to mining. There's a bit of everything in here, and I'm really excited to cover it. Now, long-standing content in Oldschool Runescape is not changed very frequently, with a few exceptions like the blowpipe nerf, item level requirement changes, and other small examples, but this one's huge and it covers a lot of things. Now, this is just a bullet point summary of the changes they are looking to make. Nothing's in depth. We're going to be getting tons of blogs, chances to give feedback as we move into 2024, but having read through the entire blog, I actually find myself kind of excited, although there's going to be some nerfs, there's going to be some buffs, and some significant changes. So let's get into it. Now, to start us off here, let's jump right into the meat of it. Let's start with some of the bigger, more impactful things. Now, the first major change they're looking to make is actually to run energy. Run energy has been a pretty hotly discussed topic for a while, particularly with how it affects people in the early game. Running around on a brand new account with no teleports kind of sucks, especially if you're an Ironman. And they're looking to make some changes to it. In short, they're looking to make some changes to the run energy drain, the energy regen, and with how weight and agility interact with them. Now, they don't specifically indicate what these changes are going to be, but I'm pretty certain they're wanting to make them more forgiving. Generally, run energy becomes pretty inconsequential in the late game with access to stamina potions, graceful and stuff like that. It's really in the early and mid game that you're really suffering, so I'm pretty sure they're looking to make that a bit more appealing for new players. I think most players wouldn't cry over the graceful meta being gone. I think Leagues especially has brought that to the table. It's kind of fun watching people run around in whatever gear instead of one singular item set. Gets kind of boring. Okay, so here's the big one. They're going to be making some pretty significant fundamental changes to how NPCs' defenses work. The general idea and their intention with these changes is they want to make bringing the correct item for the job a bit more pronounced. So if a monster is weak to crush, it's going to be a bit weaker to crush than it was before. It's going to be a lot more appealing to bring a specific crush weapon. If a monster is weak to stab, you might want to bring an abyssal whip. If it's weak to crush, maybe a abyssal bludgeon, Sarachnis cudgel, something like that. That is the case now, but often a slightly stronger weapon will just be better, even if it's not weak to that style in particular. Now, one thing you might notice is that being weak to stab, slash, and crush is a melee specific attribute. Ranged magic aren't like that. If a monster is weak to range, then it's weak to all ranged weapons, not just a select few, and the same thing with magic. Now, because if you make a monster weak to ranged, it's weak to darts, javelins, and blowpipe in the similar manner, it makes it pretty difficult to design bosses and monsters that are weak to a variety of different ranged and magic weapons. So what they're looking to do is actually introduce ranged type weaknesses and elemental weaknesses. Now, ranged type weaknesses would be divided into heavy, which would be javelins and bolts, standard, which would be arrows, and light, which would be thrown weapons like knives and darts. For magic, elemental weaknesses would be in the form of air or smoke, water/ice, earth/shadow, and fire/blood. So for example, instead of a gargoyle just being weak to ranged, it would be weak to heavy ammunition. So you might bring a heavy ballista when you're killing gargoyles. Or for example, fire giants, which would be weak to, of course, water or ice spells, which would allow for a ton of different design choices and would improve the viability of a ton of different weapons that are currently pretty much useless. Now, this is a huge change when you think about it. Every monster in the game needs to be redesigned to have 3 different range type weaknesses and 4 different magic type weaknesses. That's a huge change and will significantly change combat in a sense, but I'm actually really excited about this. This is probably one of my favorite changes of anything they've actually suggested. Will this change a lot of content in the game? Yes, but I think this allows for a ton of different design choices. New bosses will be able to take advantage of this. Tons of new weapons will be viable where they weren't before. But I think for the most part, a lot of monsters will remain the same, but there'll be less weapons that excel at everything. You'll need a larger variety in your toolkit. Okay, so next up here we have the nerfs and the buffs. First up on the docket, the Azmunten's Fang. This has been a hotly discussed item for a long time. It is kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to defense busting, And really what seemed to push it over the top is the fact that it was viable even on its slash setting at monsters like Vardorvis, even though it's supposed to primarily be a stab weapon. So what they're changing about the Fang is they're going to make the unique double accuracy roll only work when you're using the stab setting. Slash will be like any other weapon. So it's not going to really shred through defenses on slash anymore, which will stop it from overtaking what should be the space for the Blade of Saldor, Scythe of Vitor, and stuff like that. Now the Fang is the only weapon that they have gone into depth on what they're going to change about it, but they do mention some other nerfs that are coming. The Void Waker is going to be catching some nerfs. They say that guaranteed hits ignoring accuracy checks in PvM makes it really difficult to design future spec weapons without power creeping the game significantly. So the Void Waker is going to get nerfed in some capacity, seems like specifically angled at PvM. The Ancient Godsword is also going to be getting a nerf. They state that current healing from special attacks elongates, outlasts fights, and creates too big of an HP delta even when prayed against correctly. Another item is getting nerfed, the Occult Necklace. Now what they're going to be doing is removing some of the magic damage bonus from the occult and distribute it to other parts of magic progression. Could be on the weapons themselves, could be on armor, it could be from new items. They don't say exactly where that's going, but somewhere in the magic progression. And finally, they're actually going to be potentially nerfing the Tome of Fire and Water. This isn't really because they're too strong now, but because of the changes they might make to elemental weaknesses, they might become overtuned at that point, so they might have to tone them down due to some of the rebalancing changes. So that's it for the nerfs. We don't know too much more about most of them, but there is one item jagex has given us actually a lot of detail on, and that is the Scythe. Players have been clamoring for a buff to the Scythe for so long, and it is finally happening. The Scythe is being changed because there's a few major issues with it. One big one is the cost. The upkeep cost of the Scythe is one of the most expensive weapons in the game, and even if it's technically best at some content, often players won't use it there because it's so expensive. And I think overall it doesn't really feel like it occupies the same space as the other mega rare items like the Twisted Bow and the Tunic and Shadow. So let's start with what they're actually changing about the Scythe, or going to be changing. The Scythe is going to receive a slight accuracy buff so that the use cases are slightly more expanded. Specifically, they're going to be given an extra 15 slash accuracy. So this will hardly increase the DPS on lower defense monsters, but the higher defenses they have, of course, this will be a bit more of a significant change. The other change they're making to the Scythe is actually to the cost. They're going to be looking to make about a 25% reduction in the cost of the Scythe by reducing the amount of blood runes required to charge it. The cost per swing is going to go from around 780 down to roughly 585. And finally, they will also make it so that if your Scythe misses, it will not use a charge. So this will also help reduce the cost per hour a bit, especially if you're fighting higher defense monsters where you're more likely to miss. Now these changes are significant, but really the biggest thing that they're pledging to do to help make the Scythe more viable is to design more future content with the Scythe in mind. So although the Scythe is going to be stronger as soon as these changes come to the game, the bigger issue is that the Scythe just isn't that viable at nearly the amount of content that the Twisted Bow is, or the Tunic and Shadow. In recent memory, monsters have been designed with high defense levels, which has made the Scythe a bit of a struggle to use. So long term, they're going to commit to adding more content featuring low defense / weak monsters or 3x3 monsters where the Scythe is going to shine. Now that's not the only buff. Now one interesting change they're going to be making that will affect the entire game is they're adjusting the damage on hit to roll from 1 to your maximum instead of 0 to your maximum. So if you successfully pass your accuracy check and hit the monster, you will hit now a minimum of 1. Now this helps with a variety of content, in the early game especially, because if your max hit's a 1, like it is when you start, you'll hit 0 50% of the time that you actually hit your opponent, which means you're going to miss a lot less in the early game. But this also actually improves the use of items like the Dragon Warhammer or Arclight, because now if you pass the accuracy check and hit, you will guaranteed hit something, which is all you need for an item like the Dragon Warhammer. Now beyond that, they are buffing some other content as well. The Elder Maul is getting a buff. They don't say what it is. It's uncertain whether they meant anything beyond the Chambers of Zarek Tecton change. The Soul Reaper Axe is going to be getting a buff. No information on that. All they say is a bit too frustrating to feel good using. We'll see. Could be anything. They're going to reduce the drain rate of bottom tier prayers like Thick Skin, Burst of Strength to make them a little more useful as a lower level option. that doesn't impact your prayer as much. And they also want to improve Sharp Eye and Burst of Strength prayers. So just a few other small buffs to the early game. So anyway guys, that is it for all the major changes. There are of course a ton of smaller things that are happening to skills like Agility, Slayer, Thieving, and even Mining. For the most part though, those are going to be minor changes, not changing the meta of the game too much. But I would highly recommend reading through all of them. There's tons of little things in there that I think a lot of people are going to like. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing more in-depth blogs on these changes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.